4 years since China initiated the integration of Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei and the development of the Xiong'an New Area, the scheme is experiencing a year of growth. Coinciding with its 4th year, the National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, will soon begin. People at home and abroad will be focusing more on economic restructuring, in-depth reform, and opening up of the Chinese economy than on regional integration. So, how do we evaluate the urban integration in this region? What does the Xiong'an New Area mean for Chinese urban and rural planning? And what can we expect in the forthcoming 5 years with more national and regional integration policies on the cards? To discuss these and other issues about integration around Beijing, I am very pleased to be joined in the studio by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, Mr. Andy Mock, the founder of Red Pagoda Resources. We shall also be talking to Professor Yorizumi Watanabe from Keio University, Japan, via satellite. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Monday marks the 4th anniversary of President Xi Jinping calling for Beijing's greater integration with its neighboring areas, including the municipality of Tianjin and Hebei province. The 3 areas are known as the 3 engines of growth in northern China. Integration is set to give the region a powerful boost in a similar fashion to the way the California city of Los Angeles rose to greater prosperity after better connections were established with its surrounding municipalities. During the past few years, Beijing has relocated less important industries and diverted the accompanying population to neighboring cities in Hebei. The move is set to ease population pressure in the capital and beef up the competitiveness of the surrounding areas. Last April, a new economic zone known as the Xiong'an New Area was established in Hebei. The new area will play a significant role in helping phase out what are considered non-core functions from Beijing. Senior leaders of the Communist Party of China have stressed the need to ensure that Xiong'an becomes a high-quality, modern, socialist city.
Well, gentlemen, what are your expectations about the construction of Xiong'an New Area since this initiative was put forward almost exactly 1 year ago, April the 1st of 2017? Members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo were briefed about the latest progress in the construction, but are you confident that everything is going on as scheduled?
I am confident because when we look at the history of these mega projects in China, from Shenzhen to Pudong in Shanghai, they all in the beginning faced enormous skepticism, not just in China but especially overseas. And when we look back on this, we see what just phenomenal successes they were. So with that track record as a context, I think that Xiong'an can enjoy a similar degree of success over the next few years.
Xiong'an does have a very rosy picture about its ambitious planning. President Xi Jinping does have a very good vision about Xiong'an and what it means for the urbanization and the regional integration, but I'd like to have your thoughts.
Yeah, I totally concur with Andy, but I want to add a note though. It is very clear to me that the first wave of people or companies going to move there are the state-owned enterprises. We have 120-some state-owned enterprises. These are huge companies, behemoth companies, directed under central government control. And we have seen news releases one after another. CEOs of these companies have pledged to move some of their functions to that area. So just do a quick calculation. You have more than 50 companies who are headquartered in Beijing, and just even take a moderate assumption that 1,000 people move there. So we're talking about 1,000 families, times 50 companies, more than 50 companies and their families, and the supporting, roles and also economies created by these people in areas of the restaurant industry, real estate industry, other supporting facilities. Pretty soon you have a 250,000 people stationed there. So I think that's already a very beginning of a moderate city there.
Majors, the British literature, for example, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, are sort of not very surprised about the new version of the two cities. However, don't you think by encouraging the construction of Xiong'an, Beijing will have a very tough regional competitor? A lot of people start to complain that Xiong'an doesn't have a clear identity and niche about what it wants. compared with the quite established status and glories of the capital city?
Well, I think this is part of the larger regional economic development strategy. So it's not just Xiong'an and Beijing, but it's also Beijing, Tianjin, and parts of Hebei province, which has been called the Jingjingji, right, the JJJ economic area, which is enormous. It's about the size of the state of Kansas in the United States, with more than 100 million people, accounting for 10% of China's GDP. And my understanding of the overall blueprint is that different cities and different areas will have different specializations. So, for example, Beijing will be the capital city with capital city functions. Hebei will mostly be around smart manufacturing. Tianjin is a port city.
Beijing also wants to be the Silicon Valley, the center of financial industry in northern or northeastern China. Or to be more precise, in eastern China. So it doesn't want to have a serious competitor, I'm afraid. John, do you think that Beijing will have a very tough competition?
In some way, what you said is right. But look at the overall function of Xiong'an. I think initially, at least, mostly it's taking some of the non-core, described as non-core capital functions of Beijing, moved there. But I'm not quite sure that I agree with the notion that this city doesn't know what they're getting into, their future plan is. I think they're very clear. And I have some internal sources that are telling me that. I have a very good friend who very closely with their government. I think they're very clear about what they want. I think it's just that they haven't really communicated with the public very publicly about what really they want. I think what they want is exactly what a modern city would like to have. They want high-tech industries, they want chimneyless industries, in those biotech industries, in big data, artificial intelligence, all these very popular, hot, and sexy sectors in industry of the future. They want it. I'm pretty sure they want it. So in that sense, they are competing with Beijing. Beijing, of course, has the Xiong'an New Area. It has its own version of Silicon Valley.
But the capital city is the capital city, where you have a lot of interest groups who would be dying to vie for their own niche in the capital city instead of being relocated to Xiong'an. They would fight they would refuse to be relocated. I mean, for example, latest development shows that only one prestigious university, Beihang, will be moved to Xiong'an. For all other prestigious schools of higher learning, they would stay on. They would refuse to be moved outside the capital city. What do you think of the opposition and the frustrations?
Well, I think change is always difficult, whether it's change at the corporate level, at the government level, or at the country level. So there are always interest groups, and I think this is why management consulting firms have practices dedicated just to change management. How do you get people to buy in to a new agenda? So I think we need to recognize this is difficult. On the other hand, I think that Beijing, is home to a number of the top universities, not just in China, but increasingly around the world, really does have a unique status that will be very hard to replicate elsewhere.
Yeah, I want to add a note about education, so I know a little bit more about this. There's a rumor out there, there's a list of 11 universities directly under the Ministry of Education, okay, and they have several criteria. First of all, they don't have a second campus already, right? Second thing is that it's already located inside this Fourth Ring Road. There's a very large undergraduate population, and something else, I think. And supposedly these universities are supposed to have a second campus or move to this area. By the way, my university fits that criteria, okay? But the point I want to make is that, our universities are controlled by the government. They are national universities, right? So, in that sense, I think, you're talking about resistance to that. I don't quite believe it. Especially, I mentioned that the first wave of companies moving there will be state-owned enterprises.
And above all, the political will of President Xi Jinping should never, ever be questioned by them.
Absolutely, no.
Otherwise, they'll be disciplined.
Yeah.
Let me cross over to Professor Yorozumi Watanabe, who's standing by in Tokyo to brief us his thoughts on, for example, Tokyo urban area is the largest collection of people on planet Earth, with more than 37 million people. Well, that's a formidable presence of the population in Japan, the biggest of its kind in the world, and that connects to the urban area through railways and highways. So what could we learn from Japan's experience in regional coordination? Professor Watanabe.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me again. I would think that the most important thing is how to secure the public transportation. You know, in Tokyo, not only in Tokyo, but also other big cities like Osaka and Nagoya to some extent, that we have a quite well-developed web network of railways, you know, and also we have subways in American English. In British English, it's underground. You know, we have the metro system, which are extremely well developed. And both railways and subways, you know, the several companies are competing each other. For instance, for the railways, there are 7 railways, including monorail company in Tokyo. Plus, you have 2 major subway companies. One is run by Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and the other is again private company. And so if you want to go to Haneda Airport from the city center, you have several ways and means to go there. Either you can go by taking Japan Railways and connection to Tokyo Monorail, that's one way. Or otherwise you can go via Tokyo Metropolitan subway system. And also you have limousine bus, which has been servicing between the city center and Haneda Airport. Likewise, if you go to Narita Airport, you have Narita Express, which is run by JR, Japan Railway. Yeah. And also you have Keisei Skyliner, you know, by means of only 38 minutes from city center of Tokyo to Narita, which is about 60 kilometers away from Tokyo. So you see, this altogether brings quite good connection and well-developed web of public transportation. I think this is really a very important element when you think of, you know, the organizing big agglomerations like Beijing and Tianjin and so forth.
These are indeed very inspirational lessons and experiences we can draw from our neighboring country of Japan. But other than the issue of traffic congestion and overpopulation, Professor Watanabe, how do we see foreign investments participation in Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei regional integration and construction?
Yes, I think you know, the Tokyo's Tokyo is too much concentrated. You know, too much concentration in Tokyo, and Tokyo is still growing, and that is really quite a serious matter. If even in comparison with other larger cities like Osaka or Nagoya, you know, the population of Tokyo itself is still growing. So you know, the government, central government, and also Tokyo municipal government, both of them have to cope with this kind of phenomena. So it's not really that easy. You know, in the 1960s and 70s, they tried to build up new towns, what they call new towns. For instance, in Tama area, which is about 20 kilometers away from the city center of Tokyo. But now the people living there is getting older and older, and commercial activities have been rather slowed down. Therefore, number of department stores, even big, large-scale supermarkets, have been moving away from those so-called new towns in the suburbs or outskirts of Tokyo. So people are coming into Tokyo, you see, and that is still the major issue that we have to address.
Thank you so much. He didn't answer my question about how to attract overseas investment to build Xiong'an New Area. But what are the policy incentives other than the environmentally friendly planning and turning Xiong'an New Area into the center of Silicon Valley. What else have been rolled out to attract overseas investment?
Professor talked about importance of transportation. I mean, as he said, in Tokyo, transportation system is very good. I'm always amazed at how people in Tokyo commute to work, like an hour and a half every day. People still do this every day. But back to China, I think other than transportation, the bottom line is to make people feel at home while being away from home. I mean, the first people moving to Xiong'an will be those people from Beijing mostly. And I'm pretty sure they're not going to sell their houses. They're not going to sell their condos. They're going to keep a home here, right? So you want to keep another, you want to essentially ask these people to be happy with creating another home, 30 miles away. And this, hopefully these people will be happy staying there. So, in that aspect, in terms of, the housing, the, easy access to hospital service, kids' education, the hukou system, these things built together. I know, for example, they've been very creative, innovative in terms of designing a new hukou system there to try to not make a big difference for people moving there. So all these things combined in a package, essentially to deliver a very strong signal that you are staying at home while being away from the other home in Beijing. Right?
And there won't be any commercial properties. I mean, the properties will be up for renting instead of purchasing. Do you think this will be very attractive for young people? Because living costs will be seriously reduced.
Well, I think it certainly solves one very important problem of urban living, especially in the Tier 1 cities in China, which is affordability of housing. So if you eliminate this need for a large down payment, being liable for a mortgage payment that accounts for 20-30% of your monthly salary, I think that is a huge positive. I think also what's exciting about a place like Xiong'an with this new type of approach, it also sets new norms, because we know that among young people in China today, one of the expectations is you should buy a property. So and that's largely a result of existing norms and expectations. So in a place like Xiong'an, it gives, I think, everyone a chance to start with a new set of ideas, a new set of standards that could be very positive.
Xiong'an will be an incubator for the innovation or innovative spirit of the young startup companies. So let me go back to Professor Watanabe. Let's take a closer look at the so-called Olympic opportunities for the boom of Tokyo, or the second boom, sustainable one for Tokyo. Your capital city is also preparing for the 2020 Summer Olympics. In the case of Beijing and Zhangjiakou, we're going to have the Winter Olympics 4 years from now. Everybody is talking about what opportunities will be generated for the prosperity of the cities, the host cities. What can we learn from Tokyo?
Well, actually, this is the second time. If we can go back to 1964, that was the first time that Tokyo hosted the Olympic Games. Now this is the second time, and I think the attractiveness of Tokyo as a city has been much increased and much improved. The number of tourists now visiting in Japan. In 2003, 15 years ago, there was only 5 million people visiting Japan, but now it's over 25 million. And so over the 15 years' time, Tokyo has been becoming a kind of touristic center of this area, region of Far East. And this will certainly, this will certainly add some values because Tokyo is getting more and more attractive city, and Tokyo itself wants to become kind of a cool city.
Yes, indeed. And Tokyo has already been a very attractive tourist attraction for the Chinese, and millions of them want to go there, do shopping. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor Watanabe. Well, with the opportunity of the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympics in Zhangjiakou 4 years from now, what do you think of say, the infrastructure and e-commerce? I mean, these will definitely contribute to the boom and construction of Xiong'an.
I think so, and I'd like to go back to an earlier point related to that John touched on, the importance of transportation infrastructure. So one of the 4 great modern inventions of China is high-speed rail. And I think it's important to recognize that when major metropolises are being planned, it's not really the distance that matters, but it's the commute time. And through high-speed rail, by allowing people to have an hour or less commute to get to the CBD, with high-speed rail, that's dramatically increased the area that a city can cover. And I think this is part of the excitement of China, the microcosm of Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei, is that it creates opportunities of unimaginable scale that previously were not possible because of innovations like high-speed rail.
The magnitude of the construction will be very promising. John, what about having a green Xiong'an?
Yeah, well, this is definitely one of their goals. You know, they make it very clear that they don't want any sort of heavy industries, any polluting industries. I mean, the thing is that you know, people in the West usually tend to underestimate the speed of change in China, also including the speed of change of air quality. You know, I remember vividly several years ago when I was picking my boss when I was working for a foreign consulting company on a part-time basis, and he told me that, you know, he came from Los Angeles. He said, you know, it took Los Angeles over 10 years to rectify the pollution problem. It's not very much a big deal for Beijing. Probably take 10 years. Guess what? You know, less than 2 years. You know, we do our things in our very Chinese characteristic way. You know, we have a very strong government. We have an administrative venue to enforce these things. So, you know, when it comes to having a green growth model for the Xiong'an New Area, I don't have any doubt about this. I mean, they're not going to accept any heavy polluting industries there. So,
and the President Xi Jinping and Chinese politicians have made very solemn promises in Paris to help facilitate the climate change in a positive way, not a negative way. Having said this, everybody is also focusing on problems concerning the future of Xiong'an. For example, we did have the huge success of Shenzhen, which shares the border with Hong Kong. And you know what I mean. We also have the Changjiang River Delta region that it covers Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang provinces. And these 3 places are the engine or the powerhouse for the regional integration and urbanization. In sharp contrast with the huge success of Shenzhen, the Pearl River Delta region and the Changjiang River Delta region, we have the Bohai Bay, which I'm afraid will be put to shame in many ways. So what do you think of what we call regional competitive edge in Xiong'an?
Well, I think when we look at these 3 areas, we also need to look at it through the lens of China's stage of development. So Shenzhen, of course, at that time needed the catalyst of being adjacent to Hong Kong. I think Shanghai at that time as well had some foreign impact with foreign capital, but Xiong'an, now at China's stage of development, I think really has all of the indigenous resources to make this a success. So I think it's actually very well positioned to be competitive with the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta areas as well.
I've noticed a lot of the BBC reports, and indeed those from CNN and other international media players, that China rules by decree. The administrative capacity of the central authorities are extremely powerful. Therefore, the prospect of Xiong'an will be bright simply because we have a strong leadership. Is that the case? Well,
I think ultimately it's still the economy. I mean, you can't just build a city by relying on, you know, the central government using fiscal money to finance it. You still need to have to grow jobs, grow business opportunities, attract businesses. That's how Pudong succeeded. That's how, you know, Shenzhen succeeded. So I think, you know, I think they face some challenges. I mean, especially I think the sort of the business culture in the northern part of China is not very attuned to that kind of opportunities compared
Look
with
at the development of the 3 provinces in Dongbei. I mean, no one would invest beyond the Shanghai Guan.
Right. So I think that's a challenge, and they have to overcome that. Of course, you know, the government is going to support that. But it's not going to be enough. You can't just sustain us. Again, you can't sustain a city just like, spending money from the government. I mean, historically, look at several examples. I mean, a couple of countries have tried to move another capital, right? Look at Brazil, look at, say, Burma, look at, there's an African country called Tanzania that's moved its capital to Dodoma. And there's some other countries too. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. But I think the key differential is that if this new city is purely based on central government bankrolling this, I don't think it's going to have a very good future. It has to create its own jobs. It has to create its own businesses, attract businesses. That's the bottom line. It's the economy, stupid, right?
As an American, I would look at it like this, and I completely agree with John that government fiat or government decree, I think, is necessary but not sufficient. So there has to be an underlying economic logic that will create the sustainable economic growth. So, again, as an American, I look at a place like Las Vegas, a city built in the desert, because they recognize that there was this economic opportunity that Americans, mostly from California, wanted a place to play.
But I don't think the casino industry will be allowed to go.
No, I don't mean that there should be a Las Vegas in Xiong'an, but that there has to be some underlying economic rationale. And my understanding of the overall economic blueprint for the region is that there are complementary economic engines that work together that create a synergy. So the way that I understand that really can create a viable, sustainably competitive region that can not just compete with the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta, but really any other part of the world, whether we're talking about Silicon Valley, London, et cetera, Tokyo, that it really is, the pieces are there and they're put
Gentlemen,
together.
Before we conclude this very interesting and enlightening discussion about the future of Xiong'an, a twin project about the building of Xiong'an is how to reduce the non-capital functions of Beijing. Right. In this particular area, what has been done?
Well, I mean, some of the ministries are saying that they're going to move over there. The university is going to. Beijing is no longer a center of education, right? So some universities will be moved there. Hospitals. There's a reason there's so many people coming to Beijing is because they want to attend the best hospitals here. Some of the hospitals will move over there.
Do we have to necessarily turn to Washington, D.C. or Canberra, capital city of Australia, for inspirations?
I lived in Washington, D.C.
I lived in Washington, D.C.
I stayed in Washington, D.C. for some time as well. So
No, I absolutely not. But I think that this is really, again, I think it shows the pragmatism of the Chinese government and the party since '78 is that they don't blindly or slavishly follow the model of other countries, but they do look at it in a very, I think, rigorous way and say, what works here, what doesn't work there, and then how do we synthesize these different experiences and then apply it to this uniquely Chinese environment.
Well, there are many things we can learn from Washington, D.C. area, but one thing we shouldn't learn is the speed of construction over there. The Silver Line, which supposedly connects Dulles Airport to Washington downtown D.C. area, has been in construction for 10 years already. I've been waiting for this ever since 10 years ago. They're still working on it, So that's not the way something we shouldn't learn. But there are other things we should learn.
But Wendy Deng has been accused by politicians of the United States of trying to introduce a Chinese project to build a high-rise building in the vicinity of the Capitol Hill, and I mean that's crazy. That's indeed crazy. That may somehow introduce the Chinese speed. But thank you so much for being with us. We need to have another independent discussion to talk about Wendy Deng concerning the Chinese project or the China threat, so to speak. Well, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.